Hello, we are live on The Big Picture with Felix and
Thomas Gregory.
Joining us today we have Sarah.
Hello.
And Kieron for the first time.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Kieron. Good to have you on. And you too, of course, Sarah. So today we're talking about the Russia-Ukraine situation, and we're going to be talking about the strikes that have affected many universities, including our own one here at the University of Nottingham. And we're going to be talking about the recent by-election that happened in Birmingham. But first of all then, Russia-Ukraine. Well, it's an ever-evolving situation. As many of you listeners will know, Russia has invaded Ukraine, although it claims it's just a special military operation or something along those lines. So they've now taken their first city in the south of Ukraine called Kherson. I apologise if I've spelled that wrong. There have been assassination attempts apparently on President Zelensky. He's survived all of them. They've circled Kyiv, the capital. There were humanitarian corridors planned for today. However, the Ukraine government have claimed that Russia have shelled these civilians fleeing down these corridors, whilst Russia claims that it was Ukrainian nationalists that stopped it, although I don't think there's any evidence for that. So there's many different routes we can take in discussing this because there's so much going on. Do you think that this is going to end soon, or do you think this is going to be a long conflict, something that we unfortunately might have to talk about on the radio for many weeks to come? What do you think?
I personally think it will be a matter of weeks rather than months. I think that it won't be long before Russian forces take hold of the whole of Ukraine, which is extremely unfortunate. I know last time I came on the radio, I was I thought that NATO, I still think that NATO are aggressors, but I think that Russia have taken this way too far, and they are most definitely the aggressors now. So I think it will go on for a number of weeks, but not much longer.
Kieron?
I definitely think a few weeks is definitely on the table, if not more. The grit of the Ukrainian defences was clear from the outset. That took quite a few by surprise, and we're still seeing that over 60,000 Ukrainians of kind of a Ukrainian diaspora have gone back to Ukraine to help fight, which is a significant number of troops. It's not 170 odd thousand, but it's still a lot and could prolong any defences.
What do you think about companies that are pulling out of Russia? Do you think this is going to make a lot of difference? And what do you think about the companies that are still operating there? I believe it is the case, unless things have changed recently, that Coca-Cola is operating in Russia. Although, some people have criticised this as attacking ordinary Russian citizens for decisions made by Putin, who is potentially, is not really democratically elected by Russians. It's not a complete authoritarian regime, but it's not a democracy. Do you think it's right to punish Russians, or do you think that actually this will just make a huge impact on the economy of Russia that will force Putin to withdraw? Or maybe you don't think that will even happen either. What do you reckon to business boycotts in Russia?
I think it's inevitable that the Russian population are going to be deeply negatively affected by this. However, I do think that economic sanctions are the way to go, because I think that will ultimately impact. That will ultimately impact Putin more than any other measures I think we can take. But I think we need kind of solidarity among what we do, because I think a few sanctions won't really make a huge amount of difference, but I think large-scale sanctions would. So I think that is the way forward, and unfortunately the effect on the Russian population is a side effect of that. Yeah,
indeed. I think it's going to be really difficult to get at Putin as the leader of a nation without touching his nation. It's an unfortunate externality, really. I think what we're seeing already is that oil appears to be the blood of the blood flows through the veins of Russia. You take out the oil and they're going to be a bit of a problem. However, when we're targeting oil in sanctions, it's driving our fuel prices through the roof. So even UK citizens are going to be taking a hit. But at the moment, it feels like a sacrifice that's worth making if we can bring an end to the conflict and stand up for what seems like the noble cause.
But I think ultimately we need some government intervention in lowering the prices of fuel for ordinary people in this country who can't afford the fuel. I mean, we've already got a crisis in our energy system. This is just going to exacerbate that. I think it is a price worth paying in the shorter term, but longer term it will have really negative impacts.
Yeah, I remember driving past a fuel station just, I think, the day after the invasion. I thought, cool, the fuel prices have gone up. And the guy on the bus next to me immediately went, that'll be the Ukraine. And I felt so stupid for not putting two and two together straight away.
Well, with the question about our dependency on Russia for energy and oil as Europe, as collection as Europe, do you think this has sort of tarnished Angela Merkel's reputation, who was quite... was not as firm on Putin as perhaps other Western and European leaders wanted her to be, and she signed up to the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline that has now been withdrawn by the new Chancellor, Scholz, I believe his name is. Do you think this has tarnished her reputation?
I don't think any more than anybody else who has had any interaction with Putin before he did this. He's, I say, unpredictable. To extent you could say any... boffins could come out and say, yes, we could have predicted this, but it's easy to say in hindsight. This has been no one saw this coming. There hasn't been an invasion this brazen in Europe for a very long time. I mean, Russia invaded Georgia a while ago, but again, under different circumstances. This was... It wasn't
a full-scale invasion.
It slowly unfolded, and everybody watched it happening, thinking, no, he's not going to do it. He's not going to do it. And then he did it. So I don't think she can be blamed for that.
I would agree in some respects, but I also think that Angela Merkel was slightly short-sighted in the energy policies that she chose, because I think that nuclear power ultimately, although I'm against nuclear weapons, I think nuclear power is the way forward in the short term until we find renewable options. And after the kind of Fukushima disaster, Germany decided to kind of close down many of its nuclear power stations. I think that was quite a short-sighted policy.
That's really interesting that you think that. Nuclear is a topical one, since Russia has now gone in with their guns and started potholing Chernobyl. Any comments on that, and maybe the vulnerability of nuclear? Because of course I was reading just this week about how nuclear, even though some think it's a good short-term option for energy, when the climate situation might get worse, nuclear is very vulnerable to go wrong if, say, there, as a result of the problems of climate change, like flooding. So, and think, say, Japan with the tsunami. So, on the discussion of nuclear and Russia going into that, any comments on that broad point in any respect?
I think that, although generally I am against nuclear in most forms, but I think that it's necessary for the climate disaster that we're in at the moment. It's a necessary kind of stopgap before we get to renewable sources of energy. I think that the correct measures need to be in place before you make a nuclear power station. It needs to be thoroughly researched. And I know that it takes decades to create a nuclear power station. Lots of time and energy to put in. Exactly.
And unfortunately, we've got fusion though that's coming up. Is that something that, maybe they can power? I don't know, like warming up a nut or something at the moment with fusion energy. So I don't know whether you think that will be worth the money put into it, or
I think it will be worth the investment. But I think that we should, instead of focusing on nuclear, I think that the government should ultimately subsidise more for people. At the moment, I think we should tackle kind of the immediate need of people not being able to heat their homes and that kind of thing at the moment. But nuclear is worth investing in. But I also think, with regards to the Ukrainian nuclear power station, I think if Vladimir Putin had wanted to blow up that nuclear power station, he would have been able to blow it up. I think that the fact that he almost blew it up is just ridiculous.
Yeah, but does it not say that he has little control over his Russian army, or is one suggestion maybe that Putin is pretending to be hapless so that he judges how the West responds and then sees how much of Georgia or Belarus, etc., he can further kind of gain control over?
I think Vladimir Putin's got very strong control of the army. I think that it was a calculated move to try to blow up that power station, and
as a scare tactic.
But I think it was a misplaced scare tactic, because I think that the West are already quite tense as it is. Let's say without doing this, I think that this is just making it 100 times worse. But also at the moment, I think that we've got a very strong case to advocate nuclear disarmament. I think that of nuclear weapons, I think that is absolutely crucial at the moment, because when you think of someone like Vladimir Putin, he's got the power to kind of destroy large swathes of the global population, and it's just absolutely outrageous, to be honest. So I think that we should be focusing on nuclear disarmament.
Go on, Kieran. Any comments on nuclear in all three strands of the conversation?
Three strands.
In terms of energy, in terms of Putin's attack invading of Chernobyl, and the other one, the other strand.
Very excited about the concept of nuclear fusion. That's tremendous. We've had 30 countries in a joint effort for quite some time now. And I've really been excited to see the fruits of that come out. And literally a nut, maybe not a fruit. What's a nut? Is it a pulse?
It's something in the back of my brain says something about that.
Not the fruit of that labour, but the nuts of the scientists. Never mind. And that's really exciting. But hopefully less dangerous.
So, in terms of you're pro use of nuclear energy in theory.
In theory.
So that's one strand.
I guess, but even fission isn't exactly. It's it is. It's non-renewable, isn't it? Because we could run out of
uranium
eventually. And then there's the Putin attack and the nature of it, and as why he is not fully sending in his troops, and he's kind of drip feeding them, and why he chose to. Maybe didn't choose to attack Chernobyl.
I think he's just stepping everything up slowly, really slowly. It's almost he's still. Russia have for a long time have been operating in sub-threshold warfare. They're just adding on. Well, it depends if you want to use the term warfare.
Unconventional.
Or not. Just adding a little bit more. You weren't sure whether to challenge them last time, and it's only a tiny bit more. It's not enough to challenge them to challenge Russia again, right? Let's see a little bit more. And he's just. I feel like that. Adapted to a military operation scenario looks a little bit like this. Well, just strip a few more troops in.
Which gruesomely is at the detriment of the actual Russian army boys who have been sent there. As we understand, without they don't admit that, but they understood that they didn't really know what they were getting into from the stories on the front line, which is. Just terrible, really. But without digressing onto that, I think we should finish up with Felix. Well, we should move on to Felix's nuclear question that he was going to ask about tactically of disarmament, of whether this is an example of disarmament or not.
Well, I pose to you, Sarah, that is it not the case that the NATO and the nuclear weapons that NATO has could be one of the reasons why Russia has not invaded Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, but has invaded Ukraine?
No, absolutely not. I don't think a nuclear war will ever take place. I don't think that anyone in their right mind would risk that.
Yeah, but is Putin in his right mind?
Yeah.
And did you think that Putin would ever invade the Ukraine?
I did. Yeah, I did.
Okay,
I thought maybe eventually he would. I didn't think it would happen now. I thought it would happen in maybe not Putin, but I thought Russia in its form maybe. I don't know, 10, 20 years down the line would take the whole of Ukraine, but not right now.
Based on its historic obsession with Ukraine being Russian, although so was Lithuania.
Well, I think that Ukraine is a kind of unique case because the idea of Russia started in Ukraine rather than in Moscow or St. Petersburg. So I think that Ukraine is unique in the Russian perspective. But I think that the idea of deterrence is the argument is a poor one because we've had examples from around the globe of deterrence not working or deterrence not really being a factor because kind of Israel until potentially recently has had a kind of nuclear monopoly in the region that it's in, and yet it hasn't deployed nuclear weapons in any of its kind of enemy the kind of countries. It hasn't deployed the nuclear weapons, so I think the idea of deterrence is a poor one.
I think potentially Israel's nukes could be the reason why all of its surrounding states that quite frankly have a very anti-Israel policy and would very much like to get if you just look at the history, Israel's been invaded by a lot of its neighbours, or at least they've tried to, and then Israel's ended up invading all of its neighbours. I think potentially the nukes could be the reason why they haven't been invaded so far.
Well, it certainly set off Pakistan against India. Yeah. However, when both of them gained nuclear power, they did have a war and neither of them used nuclear weapons. So that might suggest that there is at least luckily a disinclination to want to use nuclear weapons unless it's really necessary. However, Russia and Putin is flexing Russia's nuclear capabilities as a way of effectively bargaining by saying that, you know, the West may be stronger militarily, but we've got really strong nuclear weapons. So listen
Almost
to our demands.
6,000 nuclear weapons.
So
Wow. And cruise missiles, hypersonic cruise missiles to deliver them. No more 4-minute warning. It's literally like, surprise, here's a nuclear weapon. And
well, that's kind of supports my deterrence point, because ultimately, by the time that we get hit by a nuclear bomb, we might not know that it's even coming.
yes.
But on the point of deterrence, though, in theory, of course, it's better if we don't have nuclear weapons. I think everybody can agree that it would just be better if we didn't have the technology in the first place. However,
well, we don't know what history is, a counterfactual. We don't know what continental history or what
well,
history would
look,
look like without
the very presence of nuclear weapons in theoretically increases the likelihood of nuclear weapons being used. If they didn't exist, they wouldn't be used. But of course, it brings up that point about nuclear deterrence and about whether it's worth it or not. I lost the train of thought there, but it will come back to me eventually. But yeah, of
Sarah,
course.
you don't think Russia's going to invade Georgia then?
No.
They have, 2008.
Well, I think
You don't think
they
they'll do it
won't
again?
again. I don't think they will again.
So you think
no.
once they've got Ukraine, Putin's going to get back and
Yeah.
relax?
I think so.
It's all well and good deterring getting rid of nuclear weapons, but how the West will not want to get rid of their nuclear weapons until someone else gets rid of their nuclear weapons, and
And vice versa.
It's like changing to a different economic system globally. You might have reasons to say that capitalism is flawed, but changing to a better system globally to get everybody involved in that is nigh on impossible. So
what's difficult was, I think they're not necessarily two comparable analogies, because not everyone agrees on getting rid of capitalism and moving to socialism, but for a period in history we had both superpowers who had agreed that their political will was to get rid of nuclear weapons, and it just didn't happen because they couldn't do it.
Well, and how do you know whether they really truly have got rid of their nuclear weapons when you've got a weak international body? Like, what's made me laugh in relation to the Ukraine crisis is that you've got the international kind of watchers of crimes. I can't remember the specific body coming into Ukraine to see whether there have been any human rights violations. It's like, no. You know, you're going in to see whether Russia has committed any crimes. What do we have any comments on Russia's behaviour in terms of its attitude towards its own Russian people, its cluster bombing of civilians, and today an evacuation line of migration, because obviously there's a massive just total flow out of Ukraine, is being abandoned completely. They were even bombing escape routes. So any comments apart from Putin's been pretty terrible with this? Is there any kind of
apart from boo?
Yeah, apart from boo.
Basically, just that it's appalling. That's my only comment, really.
Yeah.
That it's just completely outrageous, and it can't be blamed, as you say, it can't be blamed on Russian soldiers. Some of them not really aware of what they're kind of getting themselves into. So it can't be blamed on Russians or ordinary Russians. It needs to be blamed on the elite.
Could it be the case maybe that the Russian soldiers, the reason why Russia has made less advancement that it theoretically might have already aimed to is because the Russian soldiers, when they find out what they're being asked to do, maybe are being a bit reluctant to full send it?
I'm not sure that's the case.
No?
I'm not sure that's the case. I think that I'm not sure that there's that kind of mentality within the Russian army. I think that among some, it's a real shock, but I think that once you're kind of in that environment, it's difficult to get yourself out of it.
Yeah, I think so. As we've seen recently, Russia have been shelling the escape routes around the city of Mariupol, and they're supposed to be under a ceasefire, and they're shelling them anyway. And I don't know. To me, it raises questions about Vladimir Putin's strategy for what he's up to in Ukraine, in terms of, so people are trying to flee from the violence, but he's stopping people from fleeing by shelling those escape routes, and there are reports of people returning from fleeing back to the city. I think Vladimir Putin doesn't want to inherit an empty country. He can't take it over and annex it when everybody's left, and the Ukrainians all live as exiles and have political weight in another country, a bit like we had when many Jewish people and the Israeli diaspora had spread around the world. Mainly in America, they had quite a lot of political weight when it came to negotiating after the Second World War what happened to the idea of the Israeli nation state. And perhaps Putin doesn't want this to happen again with Ukrainians being able to say, actually, it'd be really good if we could have that area back of Ukraine. Do you remember when we all used to live in Ukraine before we were kicked out by Vladimir Putin? And I think a bit like Crimea, when he was able to annex everybody and just adopt the entire shell, the country and everybody in it, into Russia, and they're all under Russian control, no questions asked.
Well, I mean, and then it draws the question, well, if he wants to not inherit an empty country, why is he cluster bombing innocent homes?
That's true. Well,
removing cities.
I think he's ring fencing it now anyway, so people can't get out.
Well, that was insightful discussion on Russia and Putin. It's a really tragic situation, and it's difficult to make light of, really, because there are important questions about why he's doing what he's doing, but we don't really truly understand what's going on, and it's I find it very moving, actually, and hard to really get my head around it. And it's hit quite close to home, this war, I think, because it is in Europe, and it is, perfectly innocent people who are being caught up in the international machine for no real reason. So this is we're going to move on, and we're going to play a little song by Green Day. Right, here we are. We're back again. What we doing?
Thomas.
Yeah.
Just been having great banter in the studio.
Okay, our second topic then is strikes. We've had about 3 weeks, not every day in those 3 weeks, but about 3 weeks of strikes in Nottingham and across different universities. There have been issues with lecturers and other staff members of university are unhappy about pension cuts, about pay gaps, about working conditions. And it just so happens, and I hope, Sarah, you don't mind broadcasting this, but it just so happens that we have someone that's been on the picket line, Sarah, that is, with the lecturers. And what do we reckon to all of this? Because obviously you've got people that are unhappy with their conditions. They were promised a certain level of pensions that have been cut. But you've also got a number of students that are in solidarity, such as Sarah, with them, and there are many more. But you've got other students that are unhappy with the fact that they've missed a lot of education because of the pandemic, and they're missing more education. And are these strikes actually going to achieve anything? Some students might say. But what do you think about all of this?
Sarah, why don't you start with maybe explaining from your side about the strikes?
So I can really appreciate for the students' anger and kind of about the strikes, because we've had the pandemic, we've had a lot of learning that's been missed, and so I really sympathise with that opinion. And a lot of students that I speak to are angry about the strikes because of that, because of the missed learning that they've already had. However, I think this anger needs to be directed towards the university management rather than our lecturers, because our lecturers are trying to do the very best that they can in a bad situation. They don't want to go out on strike. It's very, very clear that they don't want to go out on strike. That's their last resort. They want to be teaching us, but ultimately they don't have a choice. And our anger should be directed towards Shira West, the Vice Chancellor of the university. We need to be sending emails to her. We need to be communicating with her. We need to be showing that we don't want our lecturers to be in this condition, because ultimately their working conditions are our learning conditions. So we really need to change. The students kind of need to change how they view the strikes, as not their anger shouldn't be directed towards the lecturers, but it should be directed towards Shira West.
Kieron? I think that's. I so see how that works. I think that's fair. Honestly, if you've ever picked up one of the leaflets that have been handed out on the picket lines and you read through them, the demands actually, they seem very reasonable. Even if you're one of the people like me who gets uncomfortable walking through a picket line, you read through it, what they're asking for is very reasonable. And I get when people get frustrated, sometimes they go straight to their lecturer, when really what the lecturer wants, the reason they're doing it is that you need people to go to the main university leadership, and perhaps it would aid their campaign to next time to hold banners or give leaflets out with the email address of Alan Shira West and say, if you're upset about the strikes, email this email, not mine, and perhaps that could be more effective.
You said you feel slightly uncomfortable with the picket line situation.
Yeah, just because I'm British.
Yeah, but Sarah, this brings into a discussion into tactics with strikes and support or criticism for the way in which the strikes are being done. So maybe, what do you say to Kieran? The fact that is shared by many people of having a visceral sense of automatic dislike when they see a picket line.
I think that's completely natural, and we, to be fair, we get that quite a lot, because it is seeing a large group of people where you're walking is going to be probably naturally quite intimidating. But we've tried to make the picket line as kind of welcoming as possible. We've got music there, we've got food. We've been sharing food around and stuff. Among the picket line. I mean, if you join the picket line, you can come and have some food. There's an incentive for you.
I'd missed donuts.
But so we've had music. We've been doing like the YMCA and things like that. But it is one of the aspects of a picket line is to kind of make a point and make a stand. It is in some respects meant to just show your anger and the anger of the lecturers. So I think that it is kind of the point of a picket line is to make people take notice of what is going on, and by giving out leaflets, I think that's the most effective way of getting students on board, is by giving people leaflets and talking to them about what's going on, rather than some of the other tactics that have been used.
Okay, so you do support that you think that picket lines are inherently helpful, and you think that they're a tactic that work. I don't know actually on statistic wise whether people think that they are more put off by them or not. It'd be quite interesting to know.
Yeah, I was wondering, Sarah, sorry to interrupt you, Thomas, but I was wondering what do you reckon is the percentage roughly support of students with the lecturers? Do you think there are more people that side with them, or do you think that there are more people that are a bit more angry, or do you think it's a more nuanced position of people that are angry and are in solidarity with the lecturers?
I think it is quite nuanced, but I think the problem is that a lot of students don't really understand what the strikes are about and why the strikes are taking place. Because when I talk to students about why the strikes are taking place, they're like, oh, actually, that's pretty bad working conditions that they've got. Like Kieran, when you picked up the leaflet, when you realise kind of what the situation is, it is a poor condition. But I think at the moment, if you don't communicate with students, then people are going to be more kind of naturally opposed to it. And I think that probably isn't helped by the occupations that took place in the lecture halls. I would support an occupation kind of offices that kind of that doesn't affect students as much. But I think if you occupy like a lecture hall, that's going to anger students even more. So I think that is a bad tactic. I don't oppose the occupation generally, but that is. But I think once you speak to students, they really understand what's going on. So I would say it's probably more students oppose the strikes or don't oppose it, but they've got anger. But I think when you talk to people, they do change their mind.
Okay, so now my totally impartial wading in on this is, does that maybe suggest that the methods that are used at the moment, where it's relying on students to be annoyed and go and complain to an email address which they inevitably won't be answered, is that so that the mechanism works on the fact that the students then don't get their seminars, blah blah blah, and they go and complain. However, students have no power over the money that they've already given to the university because they have a loan. In fact, the government gives it to them, so that means that the government would have to challenge the universities, and the government doesn't seem to want to challenge universities enough. So doesn't it not make sense then for a different approach to happen, instead of the same thing that's happened for 5 or 6 years, and for the next stage, which they seem to be holding as like this is a threat but they haven't used it yet, of just boycotting marking, continuing with lectures and seminars, giving students their actual teaching. However, when it comes to the end of the year, they hold the university up against the wall and say, we're not marking, or we're not giving you the marks until you give in to our demands. Now, why do the unions not use that tactic that actually puts the pressure on the universities, instead of actually giving the universities more money because they don't have to pay the lecturers when they're off?
The short answer is that they do that.
Well, have they done it here?
No, they do that. The UCU has arranged that. So there's something called short of striking, which is basically not doing kind of voluntary overtime, not marking, So doing your day-to-day job but not doing the extras, and that has been happening. I think it's at the University of Newcastle that's been happening, and I think that
Sheffield as well, apparently.
I think that the university may be withholding some of their pay, so that it is happening.
Lecturers they work 120% a lot of the time, if they're right. But that's why do they not just skip straight to the stage that is actually going to make any change and boycott the marking and not give them the grades to disallow the university from actually graduating people? Why do they not just jump to that instead of annoying students? Why don't they annoy the university instead?
But to be fair, I think from the third years that I've been talking to about this, I think that would annoy students as well. Withholding marks and kind of maybe delaying graduation would really annoy students.
But at least they'd get their contact time.
It would annoy students, but this does as well. I feel like you might just be beating around the bush, because the problem with, I think, if there's a strategy of trying to utilise the students and mobilise the students, and once they're on board, that's great, then the university will have to listen because we're the cash cows kind of
Well, we're leaving at the end of the year anyway.
We're leaving. We're only here for 3 years and we are infected with apathy. We could become sympathetic, and that's fair, but we're not going to do anything. Oh, that is a shame that you're not getting paid that much.
No, carry on.
That's fine. I'd be interested to see what you say, but I think what would break the apathy would be if we don't do something, we're not going to get our papers marked on pants. Like, we're not going to graduate. It'll bring the university to a standstill, and it would get this whole thing over a bit quicker.
And we'd still get the actual teaching and what we need to know.
We'd still get the teaching, and
we'd still have our value for money.
Was good, and everything would be in the bag. We'd be taught well, and we'd be able to do our assessments under good conditions. And then all that's just waiting to get marked, is waiting for Alan Shearer West. Is that Alan?
Shearer West, not Alan Shearer, who's a footballer.
Alan Shearer.
But also then you wouldn't be, but then you wouldn't be intimidated by a picket line. I mean, I get the point of a picket line, but you then you wouldn't even have the need for a picket line. So like, I'm just saying that it seems possibly that the actual unions could pull their finger out, right, and actually step up the game a little bit. From my perspective of watching this happening, they do the same thing every year. They go on strike. It happened 2 years ago. Nothing happened. In fact, it's got worse because the university then cut 10% of its staff.
I think at the moment the UCU are doing a phenomenal job.
They do seem quite considerate.
They are absolutely brilliant. The UCU, yeah. But I do think that they need to step it up, and I think that the way that you're going to get a strike that is very effective is a few months rather than a few weeks.
That could start affecting education quite negative.
Well, that's the point.
I guess that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But don't you see that maybe from a socialist perspective, we as the students are the ones who are the pawns in the game, and really as students, that's everything that we're saying that we don't want to be. So really
attacking Russians with sanctions in order to get Vladimir Putin.
Exactly.
But I think we need to look at the effects that this is happening on this has got on lecturers, and I think that the idea that you said, Kieran, of apathy, student apathy, I'm not sure that there is apathy, because most people I talk to have an opinion on the strikes.
Yes.
And generally it's a negative one before I speak to them. Yeah. So I'm not sure that there's apathy for the strikes, but I think that there's misinformation about the strikes. Yeah. And the university have a platform that the UCU don't, which is that they can email all of the students and tell every student that their opinion about the strikes. And we've received these emails condemning the strikes, saying they're really bad, but the UCU don't have an opportunity to sell their side of the story. So I think that ultimately there isn't apathy, but that needs to be addressed. That students need to be more informed about why there's strikes.
So very quickly before we move on, what is the solution?
It's about to get exciting then.
Ultimately, it would be more strikes. More strikes will encourage.
So don't scale up boycotting marking, or do that as well?
I would support.
So a whole well-rounded bringing the universities to the ground. Well, you've heard it here first on University Radio, Not in the Big Picture. This is a bit of Bob Dylan. The times are changing.
Hello, welcome back to the University Radio Nottingham. Before we move on to our next topic,
with Thomas Gregory and and
Felix Thomas, just in case you thought it was with some different people.
And Kieron and Sarah, who are joining us in the studio.
Before we move on to our third topic, something's happened over the break. Kieron, do you want to explain?
Yeah, I was just having a discussion with Sarah, just reclearing things up, and if we'd had more time, I would have loved to talk about it. Perhaps I used apathy wrongly. So many students like myself are won over to the cause. We think that it's we sympathise with the UCU, but actually we don't really want to do anything about it. And then I thought, actually, that sounds so. Maybe I should do something about it. I was like, it's only an email, just send an email. So I thought, I'm going to send an email right now. It's like, Dear Shiro West, please can you treat our lecturers properly and listen to them a bit more. Thanks, Kieron.
And you can put the gun away now, Sarah.
Yeah. I just thought it doesn't have to be anything sophisticated. I don't mind. I'm going for more of the childish, silly vibe. But if they all stack up, then she knows that people are worried. Like, I know that she's probably not going to read this, but perhaps the secretary will, and the secretary might giggle a little, but she'll get the vibe. So here we go. Please, can our lecturers? Please, I'm going to do a double. Please, can you look after our lecturers, please? Thanks. Kieron,
lovely.
Good.
Right, go on then, Felix.
All right, so there was a by-election. It wasn't massively broadcasted in the news because of
There's been a little bit of clips,
the
isn't it?
invasion of Ukraine. But there has been a by-election after the death of a Labour MP. Birmingham Erdington, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Labour won. That was predicted. It was a Labour stronghold. They had an increase of the vote share. Although the turnout was lower, but they had an increased vote share where it's now 55.5%. The Conservatives came second. They only had just under 4% decrease, so that's lower than what the polls would be indicating would be expected on the wider national area. And in third, with 2.1%, was the People's Alliance of the Left's candidate. That got a lot of excitement on Twitter, but got that's only 360 votes. So I suppose we can talk about that and Labour's standing. Did it do as well as we would have expected it to at this point? But also there have been controversies, rightly or wrongly, which I'm sure we'll address, over the candidate that won. That is Paulette Hamilton. There was some comments that were unearthed in, I believe, 2015, where she was responding to a question about the ballot or the bullet. Does your vote count? And she's answered by saying she wasn't really sure, and saying that we will get what we really deserve in this country using the vote. She doesn't think we will. Although Labour have said these comments have been taken out of context. But there's also been other controversial things that she's said, where she said that some Muslim Labour MPs were not looking after the needs of the community and accused them of infiltrating. Apologies, my voice is going a little bit there. Infiltrating education education and schools for the anti-LGBT point of view, which you may have seen in the news a few years ago. There were protests, which actually led to the deselection of another Labour MP in Birmingham, Roger Godsiff, who supported the protests against LGBT education. So we've got lots to unpack here.
Lots to unpack in 8 minutes.
In
Good
8
luck.
minutes, yes.
8 minutes. Let's do it.
What do you reckon to both her comments, and did Labour do as well as you were expecting, or as well as you were perhaps hoping?
Well, I have to note, although in by-elections turnout is lower, I believe the turnout was 27%, which is appalling. That's just so bad. We need more political engagement. That's just, I know it's a Labour stronghold, so less people more likely to come out and vote, but really we need to try and that's a big issue that probably needs to be addressed. But
just for the sake of democracy.
I think so. Yeah. Basically, I'm not in favour of compulsory voting, but I think that we need to encourage more people to go out and vote, and that may mean addressing different communities and kind of encouraging potentially more people to vote that don't normally vote. But I think the comments have been misrepresented. I think Paulette Hamilton was referencing a Malcolm X speech, and although I don't agree with the comments, it has, particularly by GB News, been misrepresented.
Are you a fan of GB News, Sarah?
I'm not a big fan, actually. No. It's off and on in my house due to one of my housemates.
I wonder which one.
But no, I think the it has been misrepresented. But I'm not a fan of her criticism of two Muslim Labour MPs. I think that obviously I'm against the kind of the anti-LGBT teaching. I think that it's important that we're taught about LGBT rights. I think that there is too much kind of Islamophobia in the country already, and it doesn't need to be exacerbated. So I think that
But they're the ones protesting it, though. They started the protest.
Yeah,
it's not
they did.
exacerbated by the fact that the government is saying that kids need to be taught basic education on health and sex.
I completely agree with you, but the Muslim community are not the only community protesting against this.
Right, yeah.
They're the community that are isolated by this.
They're singled out.
Yes,
Scapegoats.
yeah, exactly. So I think that although I'm in favour of LGBT teaching in schools, that was not a wise comment.
Kieran, what do you reckon?
What I reckon, it wasn't a surprise that Labour won. They've held that seat since 1945, but it's fantastic to see the first black MP elected to a Birmingham constituency. So in a sense, that's a surprise because it breaks a forever pattern, really. So that's good to see. In terms of these comments, people have gone, right, new person on the block. Let's dig up some dirt, see what we can find.
It is really tedious, actually.
Because that's what happens now.
It's really
with
tedious.
New Doctor Who comes in. Let's dig up some dirt. What can we find? Maybe we can find some topless photos in the sun or something like that. Thank you for that, Rupert Murdoch. Kind of vibe, and of course, it's a bit more profound than that. You've been looking at comments, and she is a politician after all, so comments can give her an indication of what her politics is going to be like. They're at a rally. Perhaps a little bit out of context. Was the rally called Bullets or Ballot or something?
That was the question she was asked.
She's responding to a question.
Yeah.
You've always got to be careful when people report on somebody's response to a question, because it really distorts what they really feel. It makes it look like they've come out and deliberately wanted to tell the world, I want to tell the world that we need to shoot people instead of vote. It doesn't. It's not like that. Perhaps it's something that she would have kept to herself in otherwise, but I'm an idealist. I love a bit of democracy. That is a good idea. Sometimes it doesn't always work. I also don't like shooting people, so the idea of bullets aren't great. It's quite a simple,
and it's a bit of an Americanism. I think. I don't think it necessarily floats here.
We just need to calm
whatever
down.
she meant
really.
to say.
Calm down. It was a long time ago. Like, if we could get hung up on all the things that Boris Johnson has said or anyone else has said, we just go back a few years and everybody's said something dodgy. So I think everyone needs to calm down a little bit, quite frankly.
And probably one of our last points, the People's Alliance of the Left, which has got a lot of excitement on Twitter, but once more it seems Twitter is not the real world, because it only got 2.1% of the vote. Do you think that there is a threat of the Labour Party from the left, or do you think that, as this by-election has shown, although by-elections are obviously very different from general elections because you've got a lower turnout, you've got a lot of local issues become more relevant than they are in general elections, but do you think this shows that the Labour Party isn't really being threatened by the left despite moving more and more towards the centre as time goes on?
I think it does signal that there is a slight threat, but I'm also, although I am on the left of the Labour Party, I would still support the Labour Party because I think that it's better that the left is united rather than divided. So I wouldn't encourage there to be more than one kind of left-wing party. I think that within the Labour Party there should be these debates about left and right, but I think that we should be in one party as not to split the vote. So I think that this is a threat, and the Labour Party should take notice of this.
I think that, I'm always aware of the gap between Labour Party membership and people who vote for the Labour Party. There are 500,000 Labour Party members, and then I don't know how many million people vote for them in the general election. There's a huge gap. It's even bigger for the Conservatives, but it doesn't really matter for the Conservatives as much because there's less internal democracy. I feel like that's the new... Is it the Alliance for the Left?
People's Alliance for the Left.
I don't think that's a threat at the general election level. I think people who are more inclined to get on board with the Alliance for the Left, are they quite left-wing? I don't know much about them.
They're kind of Jeremy Corbyn.
Okay, I think the people
who
who are more inclined to get involved with that are people who are already members of the Labour Party. They might lose some of their membership, but I don't think they're going to lose many votes at the general election.
Well, and you're right, Sarah. I suppose it's part of the cut and thrust of the internal debate in our political system. You can criticise first past the post as much as you like, but instead of there being multiple parties on the left and multiple parties on the right and multiple somewhere in the middle, of course you clump into two polar sides, and within that is where the debate happens, and that's kind of how it works, I guess, isn't it, Felix?
It is indeed.
And on that wonderful note, thank you to Sarah and Kieron for coming on, and thank you for everybody involved. Thanks for listening. Thanks for it's just wonderful show. Thanks for tuning in. Abike, producer, and Felix, of course. And we're going to just play a song out, one of an absolute banger, completely unrelated. This is Going Underground by The Jam. See you later.
Thank you.
Ta-ra.